Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. This bomber dropped nukes on US, Spain, Denmark, and basically everybody but what it was designed for, the Soviet Union. Loud, unreliable, killed more pilots than most of the other bombs in the US fleet, yet more than 7 decades after its first flight, it's still in operational service. That's right, it's 70 years old. It buzzed aircraft carriers in Maverick style, shot down MiGs, and on top of that has a very cute nickname, BUFF, which stands for Big Ugly Fat. To better understand this legend and see how the B-52 became what it is today, and why on earth it hasn't been replaced, let's take to the sky in the Stratofortress. Let's be real, when somebody asked each of you how a bomber looked like as a kid, you wouldn't draw a Dorito or an F-14 on steroids, you'd probably draw something like the B-52. After the war ended, the last big one with the bad guys from Indiana Jones, the US Air Force was inspired by the jet revolution and wanted a shiny new bomber. One that could deliver a nuclear payload over those pesky commies or drop many tons of conventional democracy on any aspiring communist nation around the world. Looking at you, Korea. But building a new bomber wouldn't be easy, and the development process was very long and ever-changing. From the first design, the Model 462 presented in 1946, to the final B-52A variant in 1952, there were several designs and upgrades which thoroughly changed the original design as the US Air Force spilled out new requirements. Specifically, the designs went from a B-29 but bigger with 6 engines, to a Delta swept something hybrid, and then a regular swept wing design with prop engines, over to a wannabe B-52, and then finally the YB-52. With the Chad himself, Tex Johnston, you know, the same guy who did that barrel roll in the 707 back in the day, the YB-52 took to the skies for the first time on April 15th, 1952. But like a broken record, they decided to change the design yet again. The engineers introduced a fighter-like bubble cockpit, just like the B-47 had, and this led us to the final version, the B-52A, which is what the base is the B-52 we know today. At the time, Northrop was also playing around with a bomber concept and loved the shape of the Dorito, using the YB-35 and YB-49 to try and secure America's next bomber project. But Boeing persisted in a very traditional aircraft design instead, and would win the game. But this was only the very beginning of this aircraft's evolution. This ultimate American bomber has gone through so many iterations to stay modern and cutting edge. Just like your business should with a Squarespace website, powered by the Fluid Engine. But hold on, don't skip this part as I'll have some sneak peeks for future videos. Start with best-in-class website template and then customize every design detail with a reimagined drag and drop technology for desktop or mobile. You don't even have to make 2 sites. Stretch your imagination online with the Fluid Engine built in and ready to go in any new Squarespace site. Plus, that's not all. Every Squarespace website can have a built-in shop to start selling right away, or you can use the campaign marketing tools to start driving business instantly. Seriously, Squarespace is the secret weapon that even I use for my online store, foundandexplained.shop. Thanks, Squarespace. If you want to support the channel and see more videos just like this and get 10% off your first site and domain, go to www.squarespace.com/found. I'm excited for your success, and a special warm hug to all those who click the link, helping making videos just like this. From 1954 to 1961, the B-52 went through 8 different iterations, ending with the turbofan-powered B-52H, which is the variant still in service today. However, one might ask, why were there 7 modifications throughout 7 years? It's because the B-52 was a big, ugly, you get the point. The plane had numerous issues that needed to be worked on, and Boeing was trying to perfect the design with each new iteration, and boy, it took them a while to get to where we are today. Because there were a few incidences. You remember how I mentioned that the B-52 dropped nukes on US soil and US allies? Well, it wasn't a training or testing, those were real nuclear weapons. During the 1960s, the US Air Force launched Operation Chrome Dome, the idea of which was to constantly have a team of patrolling B-52s with real nukes on board, so that in the case of a nuclear war, they were able to strike fast into Soviet territory. This led to a series of insane accidents with planes crashing with actual nuclear bombs on board. Luckily, security measures worked every time, and that's why you haven't heard about B-52-induced Chernobyls throughout the Cold War, but on two occasions, namely in 1966 and 1968, there were sort of disasters. During its routine mission over the Mediterranean, a B-52G collided with a KC-135 tanker while refueling, causing the tanker to explode in mid-air. The B-52, armed with nukes, was hit and had to perform a crash landing. There wasn't a nuclear blast, but conventional explosives inside the bomb detonated and spread out radioactive plutonium. Somehow, and by a huge miracle, there were no casualties on the ground, but the KC-135 crew was killed and half of the B-52 crew as well. And as if they hadn't learned their lesson, just 2 years later, in 1968, another B-52 crashed in Greenland in a similar scenario, and this put the nail in the coffin for Operation Chrome Dome. But by this time, ICBMs were being developed, and the end of the world cargo would now be carried with missiles instead of bombers. So what was the US Air Force to do with all these B-52s that they had lying around? After the supersonic bomber hysteria ended with a B-58 and XB-70 both being discarded by the Air Force, the B-52 was still the main long-range bomber for America. It was extensively used during the Vietnam War to rain bombs during air raids, and even managed to score air-to-air kills while doing that. Because the B-52 was designed back in the tail gunner era, it scored kills against Vietnamese MiGs during the war. One of these was confirmed by the Vietnamese as well, so that makes the B-52 the largest aircraft to score a kill in the air. After the war, the airframes went through several very extensive upgrades and refurbishments. Almost all the panels were stripped from each remaining B-52 and replaced, and each aircraft was thoroughly inspected. With the development of the AGM-86 cruise missiles, the B-52 became a missile carrier as well. But it ironically was instantly obsolete against Soviet air defense systems, even back during the Vietnam War, where many AGMs were shot down by AA fire. So the new role of the B-52 would be launching missiles outside of the range of enemy AA or carpet bombing enemies in uncontested airspace. And that's exactly what it did in Iraq. The B-52s were extensively used during the 1990s Gulf War, dropping some 40% of total ordnance on Saddam's army. However, after one freaky incident where an AGM-88 HARM anti-radar missile was shot and damaged a B-52 because it mistakenly honed in on the tail gunner's radar emission, the government decided to remove all tail guns from the B-52. The bomber that actually got hit managed to land safely and got a nice stencil in harm's way. But that means no more air-to-air kills for the buff. As part of the START treaty with Russia, older B-52s and all G variants were to be removed from service and destroyed, so the B-52H remained the only variant in service from the mid-90s onwards. Another interesting thing is that the START treaty also required the US not to carry nuclear weapons on board B-1s, so the B-2 and B-52s were now the only nuclear-capable bombers in the entire US Air Force. And yet, there was still another interesting use for these jets. B-52s proved to be an invaluable asset for the Navy, using them for maritime reconnaissance as well, and they were also equipped with Harpoon anti-ship missiles as well as anti-ship mines that they could drop from the air, making them the perfect Navy bomber. During the late 80s, Soviet pilots started to harass US carrier groups, trying to take photos, flying at very low altitudes, and recreating the end of the Top Gun films. So the Navy wanted to counter this threat and started practicing detection of low-flying aircraft with their fighter jets. And to play the enemy pilots, you guessed it, B-52 pilots playing the adversary in these scenarios. But what's crazy is that they got so good at it that in one occasion they bragged to a carrier's air traffic control that they spotted the carrier, but when the ATC replied that he couldn't see them and they must be lying, the pilot told them to look below a deck level. They buzzed the carrier just above the surface of the water in Top Gun style, surprising everybody. And then they made a turn and did yet another run, and this time with everybody having their cameras out. And this is how we got these insane pictures of B-52 flying below the deck level. I bet Tex Johnson was proud. During the following years, with most of the mechanical and other problems being solved, the last F in buff changed to fella, with pilots starting to love this bad boy. Today, it's still in service as you know, and is currently being used as a testbed for HAWCs, hypersonic weapons being developed, called by the Orange Man.
We have, I call it the super duper missile.
Apart from that, with further other developments, the payload capacity has been increased to the current 32 tons of ordnance. With the new rotating missile launchers, this jet plays pretty much the same role as what it was envisioned back after the Vietnam War. So what's the future of the B-52? Stories like the one about Captain David Welsh, who was a B-52 pilot and whose father flew one during the Cold War, while his grandfather flew it in Vietnam, are the best description of how long this thing has been in service. Currently, new major upgrade is being envisioned for the B-52 fleet that will take it to the next generation. Outdated and used up engines will be replaced by new Rolls-Royce F-130 turbofans, and various other upgrades like radar and sensors are being included as well. This may end up being the last version, the B-52K variant of the Stratofortress, with planned prolonged lifespan somewhere into 2050. There might even be 100 years in service anniversary. And just like the F-15, which received a recently EX upgrade and new airframes being developed to the US Air Force, this platform has proved to be valuable and just good enough over such a long lifespan. And who knows, maybe it'll be turned into a passenger plane next, which you can watch this crazy idea on the channel right now. And so the big fella defends the skies of the US and will continue to do so into the future. Thanks for watching this video, and let me know if you like a video on its Soviet counterpart with a similar history, the Tu-95. See you then!